I just want to know, how well did you address them? Okay, threats. You want to identify them, assess them, and prioritize them. What happened to you first? And then terrorist-related threats and hazards to similar organizations. And what we're seeing again and again around the world is active shooters, people using sharp-edged weapons, explosive devices. We have, all of the threats against the JCCs that we're going to blow you up, arson, and mail and package attacks. You're supposed to assess the risk, which of the terrorist-related threats and hazards are most likely to occur and have the most serious consequences. There are lots and lots. I know of a very, very prominent place that employed, a vendor came to them and said, "Oh, let us write your investment justification. We know what to do. We're going to get you a grant." And they thought they found the mother lode there. So this company asked for $75,000 to install sniffers to detect biological or chemical weapons. Meanwhile, the front doors for this organization were wide open. And the judges just said, "What? When do we have an attack? Chas v'sholom, we have an attack of a, through a chemical or a biological weapon. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is someone coming into our building and doing damage to our constituencies. And that's what, we should be spending our money on. So you want to address the vulnerabilities related to high risk and high consequences first. Here's some examples of vulnerability. Now, if you don't have the money to pay an outside vendor to come and do a vulnerability assessment, you can try the police. The police do what a crime prevention survey. There's also some over here. I have some New Jersey put together a really nice self-assessment tool, as did California. If you do that tool and you make an assessment, that assessment is acceptable for submission on the grant, because the grant requires a previously conducted vulnerability assessment. But you still have to fill in the threat section. But that you marry these options with the selective threat document, and you have a winner. Potential consequences. Well, what could happen? Unfortunately, when you're in the risk business, that's what you have to think of. You have to think of the awfuls. Could you function and provide services to your constituencies without your building or key staff? How would an attack affect them? Just think of, God forbid, people can get killed, kids can get killed, parents can't go to work because they don't have child care. What about your assets? Now, I'm not just talking about Sifrei Torah, but what do you need to replace to get back in business? And they want you to thoroughly address potential negative effects on your organization's asset, system, network if damaged. So we just talked about 30%. the grant. Now, once you do that, you have to come up with a plan to meet your top vulnerabilities and to mitigate them. In other words, let's say, the question is your front door set up to withstand a determined intruder trying to get in and do damage? Well, if the door is open, they can just walk in. Once they've walked in, they can do whatever they want, because a lot of people do have guards at the door, but I use the term guards kind of poetically, because there are people at the door who are not in a position to deter or stop anyone. So the best bet most of the time is to keep the wrong people out. And as an aside, since we are talking about synagogues here, I understand that there's, this isn't always possible. It's not always possible in any building. Dina asked about the school building too. Well, you can't keep the doors locked through most of arrivals or dismissals. People are just flowing in and out. But, one of Pollack's rules is don't make the perfect be the enemy of the very, very good. And so the very, very good is, okay, so if you're a synagogue, during services, you're going to have a separate access control policy. During the week, generally 9 to 5, you can keep doors locked and require people to be buzzed in and out. During classes, it's another policy, but you do different kinds of policies. And the equipment that you are looking for should address the document vulnerabilities, and the most important ones first. And the other thing that I do is I always suggest is don't make the judges work too hard. It's make sure that there's a one-to-one correspondence. If your vulnerability is you have a front door that's wide open, the number one vulnerability should be change the door, change the door hardware, install an access control system so people can swipe in and out quickly. We have a question. Adina.
Yes, the question is, has there been a match requirement in the past? Is the organization required to bring other dollars to the table to be able to be awarded a grant through DHS?
Did I say anything about a match? No.
Perhaps that was heard.
That was an old that was we got rid of the match, I think 10 years ago, 8 years ago. So yeah, if people are worried about a match, there's no match.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Again, with target hardening, they want you to do a thorough description of how each of the proposed target hardening activities will mitigate the identified risks and listed in your risk assessment. I have an example. In conjunction with the sound access control policy and procedures, the new doors will deter a terrorist attack, delay an intruder, and mitigate damage because it would give law enforcement the time to respond and address the threat before an attacker can accomplish his or her goal. Okay? Remember I said something about magic words. Deter, deny, and delay, and mitigate. So this is a real winner. I know that this will, run the table. I have 4 of a kind here. And again, this is worth 8 of 40 points. And the judges are saying, I will give you a full score if you thoroughly focus on the prevention and/or protection against the risk of a terrorist attack. So if the judges are saying, oh, I noticed that they want 43 CCTV cameras. Well, CCTV cameras do not do very little to deter. They don't delay an intruder. They don't mitigate damage. They don't deny an intruder the ability to do whatever they want. So given all of that, why am I giving them any money? Because it's very good for the police to be able to look at the CCTV and to see who the perpetrator was. And, you know, it's good for investigative purposes, but CCTV is not the most valuable asset in the counterterrorism world unless you have someone trained in detecting suspicious activity and watching the monitors all the time. So, you know, for example, in the security fence in Israel, there are female soldiers that are trained in detecting suspicious activity, and they shift after shift watch, you know, hundreds of screens to see if anything is happening. That's a really great counterterrorism tactic because A, people know what happened, so it's a deterrence. It delays or denies a terrorist the chance for an attack. Unless you have someone who's trained and is watching monitors, you're really not doing anything. CCTV is good if it's part of an access control system, so that you can have a visual ID on someone trying to come into your system, your facility. That's good. So part of an access control system, that's good. 43 cameras, good as an investigative tool, but that's not counterterrorism. Training, you can pay for training. So yeah, I suggest to people, keep a few $1,000s aside to pay for training your staff, especially, you know, detecting suspicious activity, how to do access control, evacuation, bomb threats, all those kinds of things are possible, but you cannot do training unless it's part of your investment justification. If it was part of your target hardening plan, you can do training. Okay, so we've done the plan. We know what we want to do. Now they are asking you to see if you know how to do it. Now, milestones. Okay, let me go back. This is a sample of the page. What they want to know is, do you know what kind of steps you have to do to complete a major project? So, you know, many executive directors do this every time, all the time. It's a daily occurrence. They say, okay, I have to do project X, and therefore I have to do steps A, B, and C. That's fine. For this piece, you have to do your first milestone is going to be, oh shoot. I thought I had wrote something. I'll have to change this before I go. Your first milestone That's the problem when you the phone's ringing all the time when you're writing. Your first milestone is, as I showed here, is that you complete all the steps to get the grant award contract, and you complete all the requirements, you get the signed contract. And as I said before, the start date of that is September 30th. Forget, I haven't redone this, but September 30th, 2017, because you're notified of the grant. Who knows when you'll be notified this year? I'm going to have to readjust these once I know what the notification is. But you'll be notified that you're a winner. Then you have to do a couple more steps to get a completed signed contract. And I'm saying is you shouldn't expect to get this if you're lucky and you respond to every question immediately. You shouldn't expect the money until January 1st, 2018. You saw in here, I moved the completion date a little bit forward because things don't always go perfectly. Now, the second step should be something like to solicit bids in accordance to the rules of New York State procurement. And we'll do, so that this will take a month or two. You have 2 years to do this. No one's going to penalize you if you do it faster, but it has to be reasonable. So now, installation of projects. You have different projects. They have different time spans. For example, when JCRC moved into its current offices, we ordered a very special door, which took months and months to fabricate. So we had a temporary door. So, if I was filling out the milestones on that, I would start with doing everything. I would separate the door from the buzzer system that we built into the door. That the door itself was on a 6-month period. The buzzer system that we had was really on a year basis because we installed much of it before the door came, because we had a temporary door, obviously. And then once the door came, the people had to come back and install the buzzer system into the current doors. Now, make sure that since there are, I saw someone on this call who I know is in a landmark building, unfortunately. So you're going to have to, leave time to go through the landmark process. And they want to see that you understand that if you're doing any exterior work, you're going to have approval from landmarks. They'd like to see that you're making progress reports to your boards and your board and your committees. Your final step is going to be submit all the paperwork to New York State and get it approved and receive everything. This is 22% of your score, so you have to do it right. Questions? Adina? I hope I didn't put you to sleep yet. Okay, so let's go let's go on to project management, because we're coming to the end. They want to know who's going to manage the project, what kind of experience you have. You know, many synagogues have $1 million plus budgets, multi-million-dollar budgets. Schools more so. You know, but they want to know that someone's responsible. There's a management team. There's governance. That's a good thing. And you have access to subject matter expertise. And they're going to ask, justify the effectiveness of the proposed management team's roles and responsibilities to support the implementation of the project. So what you're going to say is the project's going to be managed by Executive Director Chaim Yankel. And Chaim Yankel will work closely with the building committee chair, Moshe Pipik. And Moshe Pipik happens to be in the real estate business with access to all kinds of different things, you know, very used to upgrading buildings. And we're going to report to the board 3 times every 3 months. And we know that if we need some help, we're going to go to NYPD or DHS or David Pollack. What? I don't want all that. Okay. Now, there's impact. There's something, remember, this is government. This government that kind of worked. We have national preparedness goals and core capabilities. Don't question it. They spent years trying to perfect these, and they want to know what you're going to do to enhance the national preparedness goals and core capabilities. Well, the goals are preventing a threatened or actual act of terrorism, protecting our citizens, mitigating loss of life, responding quickly to save lives, and recovering. Okay, so that there's prevention and there's protection. These are all of the goals and core capabilities are divided into 2 categories. Anything that you are able to do with a grant falls under protection, screening, search, and detection, and access control and identity verification, and physical protective measures. Now, so what you're going to have to do is to tell the story of how each one of the projects that is in your target hardening section, how it fits into access control or physical protective measures. I think we really have a question this time.
We do. We have 5 questions.
No. You know, it's almost Rosh Chodesh. We only get 4.
Well, David, I'm actually going to just do a flyby here, which is to ask if it makes sense for you to quickly get through the rest of the presentation, because there might be folks who have to get off right at 1:30, and then we'll switch over to questions. I know I've got about 5 in the queue, but there may be others coming in. So why don't we let you go through, and then we'll come back to questions.
Okay, so just to know that I promise and I try to work on time. There's finally those organizations that have never received a grant before get a bonus point. So remember I said that there were 40 points. Some people can get 41. And we always urge people to grade your own work. I have the scoring tool on our website. So what I advise people to do is to download the scoring tool, do a draft of your investment justification, and hand it to someone who has not been through this process, and have them grade your paper. You want to know, were you thorough on X, Y, and Z? Someone can help you with that. And, if you, they'll check if you left anything blank, incomplete, if you should develop something more, or you're not being responsive to the questions. So you can get that scoring sheet online. You have to know the details, and we don't know them yet. Once I know the details, I'm going to generate a checklist for everyone to know what they have to do. Remember, here's the scoring breakdown that you can read. 2/3 are, what you need to do to identify your risk and to remediate it, and the third goes on your project. And here are the contact information sheets. You can go and you can contact any of us, and we'll try to be helpful. Now for questions.
Great. So we have quite a few here. Let me come back to the queue. Okay, the first question is there any specific start date that they should use? You had a screen up there where they had start date and end date.
I would use start date, and I will generate it once I know what the real timeline is. Last year, people were notified on June 28th whether or not they got a grant. So I would say the response is, you can do, July 1st, September 1st. Start date doesn't really matter that much, as long as it's reasonable. As long as, some people said, if you say, I'm going to start on May 1st, you're crazy. You're not going to know whether you're an applicant, you're a grantee or not. So you can, whether you start, I would use September 1st, because my guess is we won't know until about then who's a grantee or not. And I would then complete the first step, January 15th, let's say.
Great. Next question is, would upgrading paths of egress be considered? For example, installing gates along the fenced-in perimeter of our parking lot for school to use in case of emergency evacuation.
It's certainly, gates are eligible. I have to, the question is, what kind of, how competitive you'll be. And that's always a juggling act. The gates on the parking lot, parking lots, egress from parking lots usually won't mean the difference between life and death. If you can justify that would be the difference between life and death, that's fine. If you're just talking about getting out of the parking lot, let's assume we have a bomb threat, and you want to get everyone out of the bomb, getting out of the bomb. You can just, walk across the street by, you just walking. You don't have to get your car. So I would say it's eligible. It certainly is in the authorized equipment to install gates. It certainly is within authorized equipment to do a lift gate, to regulate who drives onto your property. That's a good access control thing. But installing gates, you would have to convince me.
Great, that's helpful. Okay, a few more questions here. Last, just a clarification question about whether the contracts are for 2 or 3 years.
If I remember, it's 2, but I would have to check. But what you'll know is that, number one, there will be a request for applications that's sent out, generated by New York State. It has to be, you have to comply by whatever rule they promulgate. So whether it's 2 or 3 years, it's what's ever in the request for application, because those are the rules.
Great. It's possible it'll change this year.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a very technical question, which is just how do they get the information to fit into the boxes of the application? Seems to be a struggle, and then details are left out. Is that a technical fix?
It's not a technical fix. You only have as many spaces as they give you.
Okay, that's clear.
So you have to economize. You have to tell the story quickly, succinctly.
Great. Okay, that's helpful. How many grants will be awarded? Is that something that changes each year, or is it known?
It changes each year. Okay. On our website, we have a historical chart, but last year there was $20 million nationally. New York State got 26% of the national grants. That turned out to be 70 winners out of 198 applicants.
Great. Very helpful. Okay, funding history. How many years back? Past 5 years, 2 years? What can we put in the additional information section at the end? So I guess there are 2 different questions. How many years back should they list funding history, and what's the additional information section for?
There's, in terms of spending, essentially, if you have the total, you're asking for $75,000, up to $75,000 for this year. If you have a project that's a multi-year project and you have a $1 million security plan, and if you have a plan that goes with your vulnerability assessment, then you should go for a plan that is consistent. You should fill in numbers that are consistent with your vulnerability assessment. So we had a vulnerability assessment done in 2015. It told us to do $200,000 of work. And in 2015, we got a $75,000 grant, and we did 75 out of that 200,000. Then we did 25 that we paid for, and now we want another 75,000 in a 2017 grant to pay toward our projects. That's what you should do. There's no requirement to go back further. The only requirement is if you've received a grant before, since 2005, you have to tell them.
Great.
And that's a yes or no question.
Great. And the question about the additional information section, what can they put in the additional information section?
What additional information section? I have no idea. I can't think of an additional information section.
Okay, well, we can come back to that.
Yeah,
and then
they can email me, with a specific.
Great. And then a fitting final question, which is about the Google groups. And just a reminder, I posted on the chat the link to sign up for the Google group that David and JCRC run around security with security updates. So the question was posed to you, David. It's really technical. It's about whether folks can sign up, whether they need a Gmail address or they can sign up with any address for that Google group update.
Sign up with any address, but it's more of a pain. I understand it, but it works.
Great. Oh, here, so the clarification about the additional information section is it's at the end of the funding history section.
Oh, it's at the, let me just, I'm sorry to cause you guys to be,
It's okay.
I mean, here, funding history, I don't know of anything. I still, there's applicant information, and then there's the end that, you know, asks you for
Okay,
you know,
no
whether or
worries. I
not,
think folks can
yeah.
be in touch with you directly with specific
Correct.
questions. And I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague Kate to close us out and thank everyone for coming since we're at 1:37.
Exactly. So we want to thank you for letting us run over a few minutes. As Dina said, you can contact David Pollock and JCRC at the numbers that he's listed on the slide to follow up with any particular questions. Also, we should know that a copy of today's presentation will be posted on the JCRC website later this afternoon, along with a recording of this webinar so that you can share it with lay and professional colleagues who may have been unable to participate today. So with that, I'd like to thank David for the wealth of information he shared with us, and to let you know that there are
Okay, well, I'm sorry. Let's go back to the.
Okay, there are a few upcoming programs in the remaining few weeks of March that you might be interested in. David will show those on screen in a moment. And these programs are open to synagogues, JCCs, social service agencies, or any other Jewish communal organizations. So we encourage and welcome your participation to those that you're able to attend. And of course, we welcome you to be in touch with Synergy via our regional managers, or to me, Kate Lauser, or Adina Friedman at synergy@ujafedny.org. Thanks so much again for making this time to join us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, everybody, and good luck.